Hello everybody and welcome to Acadikia, the Festival of Romany Film. We hope that you've been enjoying the selection of films and discussions that have been taking place. This film festival is running from the 19th to the 23rd of November, and we hope that you join us in the Q&As that take place tomorrow and for the award ceremony on Monday. I'm going to be your host for this Q&A, and my name's Lisa Smith. I had the pleasure of being a jury member for this year's Acadikia Film Festival, and I'm a creative producer from the UK but currently based in Berlin, and we're live streaming direct to you from the legendary club SO36 in Berlin. So I'd like to first warmly introduce our two guests. The first is Roz Mortimer, who is the director of the Deathless Woman. So Roz is an artist, writer and independent filmmaker. She teaches alternative documentary practices at universities across the UK and the USA. And secondly, we have Oliver Malik. Thank you for joining us too, Oliver. He was actually an actor that featured in The Deathless Woman, and I wanted to say congratulations on your performance.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask as well, where are you both based in England?
We're both in London, so I'm in East London, and Ollie's about 5 miles away in South London.
Yeah, South East London.
So you're quite close then?
Yeah, it feels like a long way away at the moment because we can't go out, but
yeah, I imagine with the lockdown situation.
Yeah,
it's tough. So over the next 15 minutes, we're going to have the opportunity to ask both Roz and Oliver questions. And we'll be keeping an eye on the YouTube and Facebook channels. So as an audience, we really encourage you to put your questions in the chat box, and we'll try and get through as many as possible. So The Deathless Woman, I thought it was a really powerful testimony to the importance of commemoration and remembrance of Romany Holocaust victims. And Roz, personally, I felt it was both artistically but politically as well very moving. For those of you, I imagine, who are watching this have just seen it, but for those of you who are just tuning in, it tells the story of a Romany woman who was buried alive in a forest in Poland during World War II, and her spirit comes back to bring light to a largely unknown portion of history and the atrocities against Roma, both historically and in the present. And I have to say, Roz, the cinematography and the sound design was captivating, and it really created this presence of the Deathless Woman, and that she was with us, and the use of the Romany language as the narration over both really connected me to her. You really felt her.
That's great to hear, actually, and obviously just had so many amazing creatives working on the film, helping to bring it to life. So, we had Peter Emery, a most amazing cinematographer, and Stephen Smith, sound designer, who created this whole kind of world for the Deathless Woman, quite extraordinary. And Iveta Kokova, who is the actor who plays the voice of the Deathless Woman, amazing.
I noticed that you not only directed this, but you worked on the script and also the production design, and you obviously had a really strong motivation to bring this story to the world. And I wanted to ask where that motivation started from and where the story and the film idea came from.
Well, the motivation started a long time ago when I started to look at landscapes around Europe where atrocities had happened, but there'd been no memorialization. So I was thinking about, what happens in society when we choose not to remember things that have happened in the past. And that kind of led me to digging around, finding out about what happened to the Roma during the Holocaust, and how, I realized that had been quite marginalized in the way that the Holocaust had been written in history. And of course, there's been lots of brilliant work done by Roma historians in documenting what happened, but I felt that hadn't been absorbed into the mainstream. And then I started to go and look at some of these places, and I started to meet extraordinary people who wanted to tell me their stories. And lots of the elderly people that I started to meet said, nobody's ever asked us before about this. And I thought, this is crazy, 70 years ago, and nobody's asked. Nobody's been and recorded their really important testimony about what they'd seen as children. And for me, it was always about the present day. You know, what happens in society when we don't remember properly the terrible things that happened in the past. It gives an opening for those things to happen again today. And that's what the film's all about, really, because where the film ends up is very much about the here and now and what's happening to many Roma people in Central and Eastern Europe right now. Terrible atrocities that actually aren't that far removed from what was happening 75 years ago during the Second World War, you know.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions to you, actually, was why you felt it was important to connect the historical context with the present day. But I think you've really just spoken about that.
And in some ways, that's how the presence of the ghost in the film becomes so useful, because, of course, ghosts aren't bound by time. You know, they move between the past and the present, and they move spatially throughout the world. And so she was really useful in the way of bringing the past and the present, like connecting them, bringing those two elements together. Because I didn't want the audience to be thinking about the past in a sort of historic or nostalgic way. I wanted it to be like right up against what's happening now.
I found it interesting as well as of how you use the land as a symbol, and it was the land that bore witness to these atrocities that happened. And I thought that was an interesting layer, and the sound design really fed into that when you were capturing the footage of the lake and the forests.
Yeah, absolutely. The land was critical, because at first I was just going around in Hungary and Poland and filming these sites where the mass graves had been, and there's nothing really to look at. It's like a lake, or it's like a little bit of forest. There's nothing there to tell you what might have happened. So I started to try and think, you know, just be receptive to what was going on in that place, and just thinking about atmospheres and feelings, and then was able to have those conversations with Stefan, the sound designer, later. So the land, and I did really think about the land as witnesses, because the trees are still there, the water's there in the lake. So even though there's no man-made memorial, the trees are there. You know, the trees are kind of implicated in the way that we're all implicated.
I wanted to ask you as well, was this in some way with the lead character who's uncovering this history of the Deathless Woman, was that somehow autobiographical of your own experience and search of this piece of history?
Yeah, absolutely. So the seeker character is played by the British actor Lauren Adair, and it's the whole role is based on my own notebooks and my own diaries. So essentially everything that you see her experiencing in the film is my experience of kind of being at those places, and how I felt and what I discovered, and how uncomfortable that made me about my position in the world as well, you know.
It was beautiful how you weave together this interconnectedness of things, and how really the core element for that character was following her intuition on this journey as she connects with this woman in this piece of history. And it was almost bringing in this magical type of element to it, which I thought was very unique.
Yes, it was definitely about intuition, because that's how I was operating myself in the early days. And it's also about sort of thinking about, maybe we can think about history in a more intuitive way and in a less objective way. And if we allow these kind of intuitive thoughts to have more dominance and to listen to more people's testimony, then perhaps we might get a more authentic view of history. I mean, it was interesting actually when I first met Ollie, and you know, we were auditioning Ollie to play the role of the boy, that you know, he'd had his own experiences of being at school in London and being taught the Holocaust without any reference to Roma history. I mean, that's one of the conversations we first had, Ollie, wasn't it, about that?
Ollie, do you mind if I come to you and ask you a question?
Yeah, sorry, go on. What were you saying? Sorry, my bad.
No, I'd love to ask you about how your experience was taking part in this film. And also, there's the scene where you read out that beautiful piece, that beautiful story, that beautiful piece of poetry. So I wanted to ask you about your experience, but also if you could tell us a little bit about that poem that you read out as part of the film.
My experience working on the film it was an amazing experience because the experience actually inspired me a lot. Like before this film, obviously I'm Roma myself, my family are Roma as well. But before working on this film, I never really understood what it was to be Roma. This film really did inspire me and make me want to work on giving my people a voice and getting what's happened to my peoples out there a lot more thanks to this film. This was my first piece of acting or first piece of proper acting that I've ever done, and it was for my peoples. And after doing it, Roz will tell you, like, she inspired me so much that the next year after I recorded this film, I made a whole play about my family and what we've been through as Roma people, and that was all thanks to Roz and how her inspiration and her film, how much it inspired me just working on it. So just being a part of it was amazing. But even being part of the film taught me a lot about my culture because Roz was always telling me information about what she's seen with her own eyes going to Poland or Hungary or all these places that I've never been to. I've only ever seen Roma within my family. I've never seen the other people who in the different Roma castes or different countries that are going through this. Because I've lived in the UK, I haven't had to go through the struggles that they've gone through. So working on this film was amazing and really inspiring. That's the one word I could use, inspiring. If I had to use one word, it's been an amazing experience working on this film, and it really did open my eyes up. And I'm Roma, like it made me realize how important it is to really get our voices out there and our voices heard.
That's amazing that your experience was so positive as part of that. And it sounds like you learned so much throughout that process about your own history. And then you've done something really special with that, in that you've taken what you've learned and then you've gone back and shared it with your family and your friends. And that's something really powerful.
Most definitely. And going back to your question about the poem was actually a poem by a man called Roz. Can you just remind me?
Yeah, it's Valdemar Kalinin.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, did I not meet him?
You met him at the BFI when we had the the world premiere of the film. Yeah.
I remember meeting the poet who made the poem, and it was strange because the poem originally wasn't in my dialect of Roma. So actually, a funny story is because of that poem, that's the reason that I decided that I need to start to learn how to speak Roma, because that poem wasn't in my dialect, so I didn't understand it at all. But also, I wanted to translate it into my dialect, and I was really struggling. Like my mum had to do it for me, and that poem was actually the reason. Like the time that I sat there and I thought, wow, like I really need to tap into my heritage and my culture, and that's what. Even now, I still can't speak that much Roma, but I can speak more than I could 2 years ago when I first worked on film. So that poem was really powerful to me, but it's also powerful in itself. Just
Absolutely.
talking about what it's talking about.
Thank you, Ollie. We've just got a question that's come in from the audience, and somebody's asked, at the end of the film, there's a list of hate crimes. So at the end of the film, there's a list of hate crimes, and they say these are incredibly stark. Was the use of magical, poetic imagery at times a deliberate contrast to this stark, miserable reality?
Yeah, I think yes, a deliberate contrast. I mean, in some ways, maybe by using this sort of magical, creating this sort of magical, poetic fantasy world, I can pull the audience into the film to have this sort of magical experience with us. And once they're in there, then I can get them with the hard reality of the truth. So in a way, it's really being quite manipulative with the audience, of bringing them into something very beautiful. But in actual fact, the flip side of that is this awfulness of actually where the film ends up, with that long scrolling list of hate crimes against Roma. And that's not actually, that's quite specific. Those were hate crimes against Roma that were resulted in murder or violence. So there's a lot more hate crimes that I didn't document, but those are sort of maybe the worst ones. And I think the list is not massively complete because there's not much documentation of a lot of that stuff that goes on. And of course, I think it was like probably about June or July last year that I had to lock off the list when we were finishing the edit of the film, and within weeks it was out of date because there's so much of this going on. But yeah, going back to the question, it was definitely intentional to try and sort of create a big contrast, but also in a way to sort of create something that might be entertaining, but at the same time quite hard hitting. It's a very difficult thing to do, to sort of moving across this line all the time between reality and sort of fantasy.
Leading into that, I wanted to ask you, you use such a hybrid form with the archive clips, the drama, the theatre. I wanted to ask you a little bit about what your thinking was behind bringing all of those different mediums together.
I mean, in some ways, I mean, that's my background, that's kind of my sort of specialist area, and I've just finished my PhD in that, in kind of hybrid documentary forms, but mainly with this film, there was nothing else to use. There's no historical archive of these atrocities that were committed against the Roma. So there's I can't go into a film archive and pull up something from 1942 because it doesn't exist. So I had these amazing interviews with the witnesses, and I had imagery of just these very dull places, the lakes and the forests, but you can't make a film from that. So there was so much missing that I had to find strategies to recreate it myself. And I suppose one option would have been to do kind of quite authentic historical reenactments of trying to do something that looked as if it was real. But for me, that feels quite dishonest because it's not real. So so then it's about pushing it even further, making it look very theatrical so that it's not reality, but then it kind of is. And I wanted to be quite playful about it in some ways as well. So when you go into those fantasy scenes, the very theatrical scenes that, in the first instance, the audience might think those places are real, like the burnt forest or the reconstruction of the gypsy family camp at Birkenau. But when the camera comes close, you realize everything's made out of cardboard and scraps of leftover materials. So again, it's about playing between what's real and what's not real. But ultimately, all those sort of unusual hybrid strategies are a result of there being very, very limited ways that you can make a story about something that hasn't been documented in the past. And I suppose a lot of documentary filmmakers might then choose not to make a film because there was no material. But for me, that's a challenge, and I like to find other ways to tell stories, I suppose.
I feel like it definitely added these multiple layers to it.
Well, in some ways, like some of those theatrical spaces that you go into, I was thinking about them less as sort of historical reenactments and more about psychological spaces that were related to the awful things that had happened. So, there's spaces where the feelings or the emotions connected with the event can be explored rather than historical accuracy. Accuracy is a word that I hate in that sort of context because it doesn't allow for an understanding of how people feel about things.
So I wanted to ask you as a final question, what you are working on at the moment and any future projects.
Well, it's quite difficult to be working on things properly at the moment. So I'm working on a book project because that seems a little bit more practical just at the moment. So it's a book called The Underworld of Everyday Things, and it's really about the uncanny, about the strange things that we recognize in our everyday life. And it's very much inspired by working on the Deathless Woman and all those strange things that happened to me to lead me to that little village in Poland. And I'm also kind of very early stages starting to work on a film about chemical weapons, but it's very hard to do that at the moment because I can't travel and I can't really do very much at all. So I think it's all going to be on hold really at the moment till next year, then I can start up properly again.
Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing what you do next, and undoubtedly I think The Deathless Woman has so much historical significance, I think, to our community, that this piece of history is being documented and it's being brought to the surface in this way. So I want to say both to you again, congratulations on a fabulous film, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. And I'm speaking for Ollie as well, but we're both so thrilled that the film is in this festival. It really means an awful lot to both of us. Well, I'm
Most
just speaking for
definitely.
Ollie, but
Yeah,
yeah.
I have to thank you guys, because this film to me is like, it's a lot more than just, you know, my film that I had a role in being in a festival. This is something that's like historical for me and my people and my family. Like, I've got family probably watching the live stream right now. Hello uncle, hello auntie, that are probably watching the stream right now, that are so happy because like they growing up didn't have this opportunity. They don't have an advocate. Like, we don't have people to talk out for us. So it's amazing just having a film in a film festival about us and what we've been through, and just having amazing people like Roz who genuinely cared about us and our story, putting it out there, and people like the film festival is putting it out there. It's amazing for us as a community. Like, I'm thanking you on behalf of the whole Roma community and people and everything. I appreciate it.
Well, Ollie, you're the advocate now.
Yeah, I was just
100%.
about to
I'm the
say that.
advocate now.
You are.
Do you have any future plans, Ollie, to become more involved in film?
Yeah. Before the after this, I told you I'd done the play, which was about Roma. My family were in it, and a lot of other Roma people were in it. And now I'm working on, since it's lockdown, I can't really do film, but I'm working on a podcast, which I'm gonna do the BBC about me being a Roma. And I also wanna, hopefully, I don't want to talk too soon, but I'm working on I've been jotting down little things for a script or something about a film about Roma people that's probably more personal to me, but I've just been trying to find ways on how to make it and what to do, because obviously I've never done it before. But right now I've just been thinking about it and jotting down ideas, and it's something that I definitely plan to bring up to Roz soon, and just hopefully she can help me, and I've just been working on it and just learning as we go.
Absolutely, it sounds great, and we should definitely stay in touch, and whatever support I can offer as well, let me know. Thank you once again so much for joining us, guys, and thank you to our audience. We hope that you are able to join us tomorrow for our panel discussion on intersectionality in film and TV that starts at 6, and we also have a selection of films. And then, of course, Monday we'll have another selection of films in our awards ceremony, so we hope to see you again. Take care.